They called the police on me for moving into my own lake house, not knowing I was NSA and owned the entire shoreline they were standing on. That morning felt off from the first shout, like the wind itself was warning me. I walked into a storm I didn't start, accused of trespassing on land that carried my family's name. And with every threat they threw, I kept one question silent and loaded. What happens when the wrong people push the right man too far? If you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA or stood your ground for what's yours, drop a yes in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next time justice comes knocking. The morning air on the north shore of Lone Elk Lake had that crisp Montana bite I'd missed for years. Pine-scented, clean, thin enough that every breath felt like it scrubbed something out of you. Sunlight glinted off the water in quiet ripples, turning the whole lake into a sheet of hammered silver. My boots crunched over the gravel path as I stepped down from the back of the old U-Haul, balancing a cardboard box labeled "Kitchen Fragile," even though half the things inside were anything but. The cabin, my uncle's cabin, stood just ahead. Cedar siding weathered to a warm gray, stone chimney, leaning just enough to give it personality, porch boards creaking in that familiar way. It had been 3 years since I'd last walked that porch. 3 years since Uncle Walt, a retired federal marshal, left it to me in a will that surprised the entire county. I'd barely set the box on the porch railing when a voice snapped through the calm morning like a live wire. "Hey, get away from that house! You don't belong here!" The words cut the air so sharply, even the chickadees nesting on the porch beam went silent. I turned just as a woman in a blazing fuchsia blazer marched across the gravel like she owned the mountain. Sunglasses, clipboard, perfect hair, everything about her screamed authority she hadn't earned. I didn't know her yet, but I'd soon learn the name everyone in the subdivision whispered like a curse. Bethany Reed, president of the Lone Elk Lake HOA, and apparently judge, jury, and executioner of the entire shoreline. She didn't stop walking, didn't slow, didn't even blink before whipping out her phone and aiming it square at my face like a body cam. "This is private lake property, sir, and you're trespassing. We don't allow squatters here. State your full name." I blinked. "Morning to you too. My name's Remy—" "That's enough," she snapped, talking into her phone. "Dispatch, this is HOA President Reed. I've got a male suspect attempting to occupy the Whitlock Lake House. Yes, I'm filming. He appears aggressive." Aggressive? That was a new one. I hadn't even raised an eyebrow. I leaned a hip against the porch rail, letting her tirade wash over me. If she'd bothered to look, she would have noticed the truck, the paperwork binder sitting open on the tailgate, and the key to the front door resting right beside it. But people like Bethany didn't look for truth. They looked for control. Within seconds, neighbors materialized like prairie dogs after a storm. Folks paused mid-jog. A couple stood across the dirt lane with their golden retriever, whispering. A man watering his already dripping flower beds held the hose like it was a microphone. Every gaze drifted to Bethany, waiting for her next command, as if she were some self-appointed sheriff. "That cabin," Bethany said, pacing in front of me, "is under HOA environmental oversight, meaning you have no right to be here without board approval. None. Who told you you could move in?" "My uncle," I said simply. She scoffed. "Impossible. The Whitlock property has been under HOA supervision since he passed. We've been evaluating new applicants for months. And you—" Her eyes flicked over my worn jeans, faded flannel, the MIT shirt under it, "are not on our approved list." There it was. The moment that disbelief and annoyance fused into something stronger behind my ribs. "I inherited the house," I said. "Legally." She waved her free hand in a sweeping, theatrical motion. "No one inherits lakefront property without the HOA reviewing the deed transfer. And I certainly did not approve you." Her certainty was almost comical. Almost. I picked up the box again, more out of wanting to stay calm than anything else. The boards groaned as I stepped toward the front door. That's when she exploded. "Stop! Don't take another step! Sheriff is on the way!" I paused, studying her. Her breathing had picked up, hands trembling. Not with fear, no, this was something else. Something personal. Like she needed this moment to break me in front of her audience. Why? Why was she so deeply, absolutely certain I couldn't possibly own this house? The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lake water and pine sap. Somewhere down the road, a sheriff's siren began to echo through the canyon. Bethany smiled wide, triumphant, victorious before the battle had even begun. Behind my calm expression, a question took root, one that wouldn't leave me for days. What did Bethany Reed think she owned here? And more importantly, what did she think I didn't? The sheriff's cruiser rolled into view just as Bethany straightened her blazer and planted herself dead center in the gravel lane like she was preparing for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Dust drifted around her heels, catching the sunlight in slow, lazy swirls, as if even the road hesitated to touch her shoes. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped out, adjusting his hat against the breeze coming off Lone Elk Lake. Marcus and I weren't strangers. Growing up, you couldn't throw a rock in this county without it bouncing off someone you'd gone to school with. He wasn't a close friend, but he wasn't an enemy either. Just a good man who'd been dealing with too many HOA calls for too many years. Bethany waved him over like she was signaling a taxi. "Sheriff, thank goodness. We've got a squatter situation. This man is unlawfully occupying HOA-controlled shoreline and refusing to vacate. He may be armed." I set the box down gently. "The only thing in my hands is a set of coffee mugs, but you're welcome to inspect them." Marcus blew out a long sigh, one that told me he'd walked into this scene more times than he cared to admit. "Bethany," he said, his tone the calm of a man choosing peace before coffee, "being new in town doesn't make a person a criminal. Let's slow down." "There's nothing to slow," she snapped, tapping violently on her tablet. "I have documentation." She thrust the screen toward him. Long paragraphs of bylaws, highlighted sections, fines stacking like casino chips. Marcus squinted. "This says he owes $800 for obstructing a lake view?" Bethany nodded vigorously. "By parking that—" She pointed at my old U-Haul, as if it were leaking toxic fumes, "in a key aesthetic corridor." I bit back a laugh. "It's a moving truck, Bethany. I'm moving." "Not into this community," she said. "Not without approval." She tapped again, swiping to a new page. "Here, $500 for unauthorized occupancy. $100 for an unregistered shoreline approach. And another $250 for the structural impact of setting heavy boxes on the porch." Marcus raised his eyes slowly. "You're fining him for putting a box on a porch?" "That porch is HOA-maintained property." "No," I said, stepping down from the porch. "It's mine." Bethany's smile had the sharpness of thin ice. "Mr. Cole, you cannot simply claim property because someone died. That home has been under HOA supervision since the owner passed. If you had inherited it, I would know." Something flickered inside her voice. Something personal. Something panicked. I walked to the tailgate of my truck, flipping open the leather binder that lay there. I didn't show anything yet. Just let the sunlight hit the thick documents inside. Marcus leaned a little closer. Bethany bristled. "That binder doesn't matter," she said quickly. "What matters are our markers." She pointed toward the lake. I followed her gesture. Bright white HOA boundary signs, fresh, glossy, perfectly aligned, stood in a row where they absolutely didn't belong. They cut across the grass, slicing a clean diagonal line 20 feet inside the actual property boundary. They didn't even try to blend in with old fence posts or the natural shoreline. No, these had been planted recently, aggressively, deliberately, like a claim staked in the night. "Well, that's interesting," I said quietly. Bethany closed the distance between us, her perfume sharp and citrusy in the cold air. Those markers were placed by licensed land surveyors contracted through the HOA. They reflect updated shoreline jurisdiction. Marcus scratched his chin. Funny. I don't recall signing off on that. You weren't required, she said. This is HOA land management protocol. I knelt near the nearest marker, brushing the dirt around the stake with my knuckles. The soil was loose, freshly disturbed. Whoever planted it hadn't even given it time to settle. Behind me, neighbors watched from driveways and porches, phones out, arms folded, waiting for the next spark. Bethany leaned toward Marcus. Sheriff, I request immediate removal of this trespasser under HOA Emergency Bylaw 9. Emergency? Marcus repeated. The man set a box down. It's the principal, she snapped. I straightened up. Marcus, before this turns into something worse, there's something in my binder you should see. Bethany thrust her arm between us. He is not authorized to show unofficial paperwork. Marcus took a step back, raising his hands. Ma'am, anyone can show me paperwork. It's a free county. Bethany's voice went razor sharp. Sheriff Hale, you will uphold this community's rules or I will speak to Judge Halverston about electing someone who will. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Not literally, but the air thickened with a tension that tasted like metal. Marcus's jaw flexed. For a brief second, he said nothing. Then he turned to me, quieter than before. Remy, what's in the binder? Before I answered, a crackle came across his radio. Dispatch to Hale. Be advised, HOA board requesting emergency assistance for non-compliant occupant at Lone Elk Lake. Possible removal needed. ETA, 5 p.m. Bethany's lips curled into a victorious smile, sunlight flashing off her sunglasses like a warning. Marcus exhaled heavily. What did you get yourself into? I looked down at the leather binder. Inside were documents Bethany absolutely did not want anyone in uniform to see. And the question returned, colder now. Why was she so sure I couldn't own the house? What secret was she protecting? I closed the binder gently. Marcus, I said, my voice steady. They crossed the line. Literally. And I'm going to prove it. Bethany's reaction, her sudden paled expression, told me she knew exactly which line I meant. The boundary line. The one they'd tried very hard to bury under 20 feet of lies. I could still feel Bethany's eyes burning holes in the back of my jacket as I carried the box inside. The screen door creaked the way I remembered it. Old wood, old hinges, stubborn but honest. The smell of aged pine and lake air drifted through the cabin, mixing with dust that rose in quiet swirls wherever sunlight touched the floorboards. Inside, the house felt like time had paused the day my uncle passed. The leather armchair by the window still faced the shoreline. His old coffee mug sat upside down on the counter, as if he'd planned to use it the next morning. A fishing hat hung from the hook near the door, sun-faded but stubbornly holding its shape. I set the box down on the worn oak table. Dust motes floated up, shimmering in the golden light like tiny ghosts. The whole place felt like a held breath, still, waiting, watching. Outside, I heard the muffled sounds of HOA volunteers documenting every square inch of the cabin's exterior. The occasional click of a camera. Bethany's voice carrying sharp instructions. Someone dragged a tape measure along the porch rail. Vultures circling. I headed for the back hallway where Uncle Walt kept anything important behind 2 locked doors and a heavy sense of privacy. The small steel lockbox lay right where he'd left it, under the old survey maps, tucked next to his retired marshal's boots. A faint layer of dust coated the lid. I wiped it off with the sleeve of my flannel, revealing the brass initials engraved into the top. W.C. Walt Cole. I knelt beside it. The metal felt cold even in the warm room. Inside the lid, the unmistakable clink of metal, keys perhaps, and the soft brush of papers shifting. Beside the box sat the old drafting table he used when analyzing dam flow and watershed reports. Rolled maps lay scattered across it, yellowed around the edges, corners curling. One caught my eye immediately, an old topographic sheet with hand-marked notations along the lake's northern bank. My family owned every inch of that shoreline. That map proved it long before I knew I'd ever need such proof. I pulled my phone out and texted the only person who would understand the weight of the HOA's stunt. "They crossed the property line," I typed, then added, "Need your eyes on this, ASAP." Within moments, a message came back. "Sarah Mitchell. On my way. 15 minutes. Don't poke the hornet too hard yet." A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Sarah always had a way of making the worst situations feel like something we could handle. Outside, the crunch of gravel grew louder. Another vehicle. Heavy tires. More shadows falling across the windows. I stepped to the door and peeked through the curtain. 3 HOA volunteers had gathered with clipboards, poking around the truck, photographing the tires like they expected to find contraband. One crouched to take a picture of the U-Haul's license plate. Another pointed at the cabin's eaves, shaking her head like she'd found a crime scene. Something snapped sharply, an aluminum measure tape retracting, followed by whispered insults aimed right at my front step. One voice carried through the open air. "He's not lasting the day." I stepped outside, letting the door shut behind me. The porch board groaned under my weight, drawing all eyes. "What exactly do you all think you're documenting?" I asked. The tallest volunteer, a man in his late 50s with a shiny badge reading HOA Inspection Lead, lifted his chin. "Inventory of violations," he said. "Ms. Reed instructed us to record every infraction. You've racked up quite a list." "Violations?" I repeated. He nodded confidently. "Unapproved exterior modifications, unregulated shoreline use, improper storage of heavy equipment." "That's a coffee maker and a toolbox," I said. "It's still weight," he replied, as if gravity itself obeyed HOA bylaws. Before I could respond, a sharp crackle burst from the radio clipped to his belt. "Inspection lead. Report. HOA pushing for emergency removal. ETA, 5 p.m. My stomach tightened. So that was the game. They weren't just pushing fines. They intended to force me out by sundown. He turned away, pretending I didn't exist anymore, already muttering into his walkie-talkie. I walked back inside, shutting the door with a firm thud that rattled the picture frames. The silence afterward felt heavier than before, thick, tense, humming with the knowledge that whatever the HOA planned, it wouldn't be small. The lake wind blew harder now, rattling the back windows. I continued down the hallway toward the old table. The maps, the documents, the lockbox, they felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't yet seen fully assembled. One more thing drew my attention. Pinned above the drafting table, nearly hidden behind a stack of rolled survey sheets, was a photograph of Uncle Walt and me at age 12, standing exactly where Bethany had planted her fake boundary stakes. He'd written something on the back of the photo in faded blue ink. "Lines on paper mean nothing if you don't defend them. Walt." The front porch creaked again, someone stepping on the boards. Voices followed, more people gathering. Whatever was coming at 5 o'clock was building momentum like a storm rolling across the lake. I grabbed the lockbox and carried it to the table. The combination dial clicked under my fingers. Left, right, left, pause. When the latch released, the metallic sound echoed across the empty cabin like a gunshot. Inside lay more than I expected. A folded federal deed, a laminated water rights certificate dated 1974, and a key, a small brass key, old but polished, attached to a tag that read, "Cabin only. Federal access separate." What separate access? I didn't know yet. But my uncle had left me more than a cabin. He'd left answers and leverage. Outside, a woman's voice shouted something I couldn't hear, followed by the low rumble of another engine driving up the lane. Sarah was close, and the HOA was running out of time. I stepped onto the porch, just as a dust cloud rolled up the gravel road from the east. Sunlight caught the shifting grit, turning it into a moving veil of gold. A familiar silhouette appeared through the haze, the old forest green Tacoma I'd known since high school, the one Sarah Mitchell refused to trade even after becoming one of the best land rights attorneys in the entire northern Rockies. Her truck growled to a stop beside my U-Haul. The engine ticked as it cooled, popping softly like distant campfire sparks. When she climbed out, the wind grabbed strands of her hair and carried them across her face before she brushed them aside with a practiced flick. "You weren't kidding," she said, glancing toward the growing crowd of HOA volunteers. "They brought half the town." I nodded. "And the other half is coming by 5. Sarah opened the back door of her truck, reached in, and pulled out a long, thick survey tube, old, metal, dented from years of field work. The kind you don't even see anymore, unless you're dealing with records older than digital storage. The kind that made HOA presidents twitch. "Tell me this is what I think it is," I said. She smirked. "Oh, it's better." Bethany Reed's voice sliced across the yard before I could ask. "What is that supposed to be?" she demanded, stomping forward as if she had legal authority over oxygen itself. "No outside documents are permitted during an HOA dispute. Everything must go through the board." Sarah didn't look at her, didn't slow, didn't even blink. She just walked to the porch, set the tube on the railing, and unlatched the cap with a click that echoed like a countdown starting. "This is a 1978 Federal Water Rights Survey," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Filed, stamped, and certified before the HOA existed. It documents ownership of the entire North Shore, which, if memory serves," she glanced at me, "belongs to the Cole family." Bethany's sunglasses tilted downward, revealing eyes wide with something ponderously close to panic. "That's impossible. The HOA controls all shoreline activities. That was established in 1989, Sarah finished for her. 11 years after the federal certification. And federal law outranks local bylaws, even HOA fantasies." Ripples of murmurs rose from the neighbors watching from the road. Some stepped closer. Others whispered. A few crossed their arms, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something darker. Anger, maybe. Recognition. Relief. Bethany swallowed hard. "Federal rights don't apply anymore. Things change. Lakes shift." Sarah raised a brow. "Then you won't mind if we take a look." She unrolled the map across the porch boards. It snapped open with the sound of heavy paper waking from decades of sleep. The lake's outline stretched in detailed relief. Depths, slopes, soil composition, all the hallmarks of a federal hydrology survey. But the real hit landed when she pointed to a thick black line along the top edge. "Here," she said, "north boundary, marked at the natural shoreline, and the ownership line extends 30 feet into the lake because the Cole family financed the original dam reinforcement." Neighbors leaned in. Marcus stepped forward too, hands on his hips. Bethany took one step back. Sarah tapped the map again. "Those white HOA boundary signs you planted?" Her smile sharpened. "They're not just misplaced, they're fraudulent." The color drained from Bethany's face so quickly it was like watching paint wash off under rain. "That map is outdated," she said, voice brittle. "HOA rules override old paperwork." Sarah let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You just tried to override a federal survey. You might want to rethink that sentence, Bethany." Behind us, someone from the crowd muttered, "She finally stepped in something she can't find her way out of." Bethany's jaw clenched. This is meaningless. The board has authority over all lake properties. Your map is irrelevant. Then explain this, I said quietly. I reached into the binder and pulled out a single page. Just one, but thick, embossed, stamped 3 times over. I didn't show its full contents yet. Just the header. Federal Land Services, Water Infrastructure and Environmental Division, Shoreline Easement Designation, 1974. Bethany's breath hitched. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose as she stared at the page like it might explode. You're bluffing, she whispered. Am I? I asked. Sarah leaned close enough for Bethany to feel her next words like a knife sliding under a locked door. This isn't the real document, she said. This is the cover sheet. Bethany staggered back a full step. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of lake water across the yard. Somewhere nearby, a dock cable clanged against a metal cleat, one of those small, eerie sounds that always seem to arrive before a storm. HOA volunteers began murmuring louder now, their confidence unraveling. Their cameras lowered, their clipboards dipped. A few even stepped away from the property line entirely, as if afraid of being too close when the truth landed. Bethany swallowed, straightened her blazer, and forced her voice into something resembling authority. It doesn't matter, she said. None of this matters. At 5 o'clock, the court injunction takes effect. You will be removed from the premises by law, and there's nothing you or your maps can do about it. She turned sharply and marched toward her car, though her steps weren't nearly as steady as before. Sarah watched her go, then quietly rolled up the map. She's scared, she said. She should be, I replied. Sarah slid the survey tube into my hands. But don't show the real document yet. Wait. Until when? I asked. The wind died for a moment. The lake went eerily still. Until their entire army is standing right here, she said softly. Until the moment they think they've won. I glanced at the clock mounted on the porch wall. 4:12 p.m. The HOA had 48 minutes left, and they had no idea how deep they'd buried themselves. The quiet that followed Sarah's warning stretched across the property like a taut rope, thin, trembling, ready to snap. The breeze died down until the lake surface reflected the sky perfectly, turning Lone Elk Lake into a giant blue mirror. Even the birds seemed to sense what was coming. At 4:22 p.m., the first vehicle rolled in. A white SUV with Lone Elk Lake Patrol HOA contracted stenciled on the doors pulled up slowly, like it wanted to make an entrance. The driver stepped out, thick-necked, buzz-cut, vest with too many pockets for a man who wasn't law enforcement. He scanned the yard with the stiff posture of someone pretending to be official. Then 2 more vehicles followed. Then 3. By 4:30, a half-circle of HOA board members, volunteers, and hired patrol officers surrounded the front of my cabin, like they expected me to start a riot with my toolbox and one sad cardboard box labeled kitchen. Sarah stood on the porch beside me, arms folded, unreadable expression on her face. Marcus lingered near the end of the driveway, uncertain and uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck beneath the brim of his hat. And then, like an overly dramatic queen taking the stage, Bethany Reed arrived. She climbed out of her pearl-white Lexus in a fresh blazer, this time soft coral instead of fuchsia, but just as loud. Her heels clicked on the gravel with sharp staccato beats, each step announcing she believed she owned the ground beneath her. She positioned herself dead center in front of the assembled crowd and raised her voice so everyone, and I mean everyone, could hear. Residents, thank you for responding to this emergency enforcement action. The HOA board has determined that this man, she pointed at me like accusing a thief in an old western, is illegally occupying the Whitlock property and threatening the integrity of our lakeside community. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Threatening how?" Another muttered, "We don't even know this guy." Bethany soaked in their reactions like applause. This property, she continued, was never approved for transfer. This man has refused to comply with removal orders, refused to pay assessed fines, and refused to cooperate with HOA protocol. Therefore, under authority granted by Emergency Bylaw 9, we will be removing him from the premises by sundown. Perfect dramatic pause. Then she lifted a stack of papers from her tote bag. A thick, freshly stamped court order. This injunction, she said triumphantly, waving it in the air, signed by Judge Halverston, authorizes the sheriff to remove him immediately. Marcus stepped forward, posture stiff. Bethany, I said earlier this morning, we've got to slow down. She cut him off with a raised palm. Sheriff, your duty is to enforce lawful court orders. This is one, and the HOA will not tolerate delays. The patrol officers flanked her, crossing their arms like a security detail. HOA board members clustered behind her with clipboards, tablets, and smug confidence. A cluster of residents gathered to watch the spectacle, as though this were prime entertainment on a Tuesday afternoon. The wind picked up, brushing across the lake and carrying the metallic scent of incoming weather. Dark clouds gathered at the far end of the valley, rolling toward us, silent and heavy. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Cole, Bethany announced. 5 minutes to gather your belongings and vacate this property. If you refuse, the sheriff will escort you out by force. Marcus opened his mouth, but Bethany spoke over him again. And you will be fined $1,200 for obstruction, already documented. Sarah took one step forward, her boots thudding softly against the wooden porch. Bethany, she said calmly, don't do this. Bethany sneered. Oh, is this your attorney? Cute. She can watch you leave. Sarah didn't blink. You're about to make a serious mistake. One that won't end the way you think. Bethany laughed, sharp, high, brittle. Sweetheart, I've run this HOA for 12 years. I haven't made a mistake yet. I nearly laughed at that. Nearly. Instead, I walked down the steps slowly and approached Marcus. He looked like a man caught between duty and a nightmare he never signed up for. Remy, he said quietly, I have to follow a judge's order unless you've got something that can override it. I can stall a little, but I can't stop this. I glanced at the sky, the clouds sweeping closer, then at my watch. 4:52. Just hold the line a little longer, I murmured. It doesn't have to go down their way. Marcus frowned. What are you planning? Before I could answer, Bethany strutted forward, her coral blazer blazing against the gray backdrop like a flare in the wilderness. Sheriff Hale, she snapped, begin the removal. Marcus stiffened but didn't move. It's not 5 yet. It's close enough. She jabbed a manicured finger toward me. Do your job. The HOA patrol guys stepped up beside her, clearly itching to escalate. One reached for a roll of zip ties on his belt. Another cracked his knuckles. Sarah's voice cut the tension like a blade. Everyone stop! She stepped off the porch and approached Bethany with a lawyer's calm confidence and a predator's timing. You're trying to force a resident out based on fraudulent boundary stakes, invalid fines, and a manipulated injunction. That's not enforcement. That's abuse of authority. Bethany snarled. You don't know what you're talking about. A faint rumble of thunder rolled across the lake. Sarah's eyes didn't leave Bethany's. And here's the part you're really not going to like. She checked her phone, then looked toward the road, then smiled. Right on time. Engines, multiple, echoed in the distance. Deep, powerful, unmistakably government-issued. The HOA's army stiffened, neck muscles tightened, clipboards lowered. Even Bethany stopped mid-smirk. Marcus turned toward the sound, confusion etched across his face. Who the hell is that? I walked back toward the cabin, placed my binder on the railing where every set of eyes could see it, and said quietly, "That is the reason I told you not to pull the trigger early." Bethany's face blanched as black SUVs crested the hill, dust clouds trailing like banners behind them. She wanted a show of force. She was about to get one, but not the one she planned. The low growl of engines rolled down the gravel road, deeper and heavier than anything the HOA could afford to hire. Bethany's lake patrol stiffened like toy soldiers suddenly realizing real troops were coming. A few residents stepped back from the property line. Even the wind paused, holding its breath with the rest of us. I didn't move. I just watched the black shapes crest the hill. 3 SUVs, shiny government issue, rolling in a tight formation that spoke of training, not intimidation. What agency is that?" someone whispered. I don't know," another murmured. Bethany planted her heels and tried to swallow the panic rising in her throat. "Everyone stay calm. They're probably here to support the injunction." Her voice squeaked on the last word. Sarah glanced at her phone again, subtle but deliberate, then leaned closer to me. "This is your window," she murmured. I nodded and stepped back toward the cabin. The wood beneath my boots groaned under the shifting tension of the moment. Every eye followed me as I picked up the last moving box sitting near the door. Its faded black marker read, "Kitchen Supplies." But the weight was wrong for cookware. The metal inside clinked softly, thin, precise, unmistakably engineered. I set it on the porch table, undid the tape, and lifted the lid. No mugs, no utensils. Just a compact NSA-grade evidence recorder nestled in foam, its smooth black casing catching a sliver of light. Beside it lay a worn leather wallet. Not just any wallet, my badge holder. The one I never intended to reveal today. I didn't take it out. Not yet. The timing mattered. Bethany marched toward the porch, pointing at the vehicles now slowing to a stop at the base of the gravel path. "Sheriff, those vehicles cannot enter HOA-controlled territory without permission." Marcus gave her a long look. "Bethany, everything past this mailbox is county land. Always has been." "That is HOA land," she snapped. "We oversee all access routes." "No," he replied calmly. "You oversee fountains, fences, and who paints their shutters the wrong shade of beige. You don't control public easements." For the first time, her confidence wavered. The lead SUV's door opened. A woman stepped out, efficient, precise, hair pulled back in a tight bun. Black windbreaker. Gold badge on the belt. Federal Land Services, Shoreline Division. Behind her came 2 U.S. Marshals, and behind them, 2 more agents I recognized instantly. One nodded at me. "Afternoon, Cole." "Afternoon," I replied. Bethany froze. You know them?" That was the moment the storm winds shifted. I could feel it. The world seemed quieter somehow, heavier, like the entire lake leaned in. Sarah stepped off the porch, meeting the lead agent halfway down the path. She handed him a sealed envelope, the one she'd hinted at earlier. "This contains the requested materials," she said, "including the certified water rights validation and the 2 boundary assessments. Both confirm the HOA is operating outside legal jurisdiction." Bethany's jaw dropped. "You gave them illegal documents?" "They're not illegal," Sarah said. "Just inconvenient." The agent opened the envelope, skimmed the first page, and his eyebrows lifted. He turned to Bethany. "Ma'am, is your name Bethany Reed?" "Yes," she said, lifting her chin high again. "And I expect an apology for this disruption." He cut her off. "You are hereby ordered to cease all enforcement actions on this property until a federal review is completed." The color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. No, you can't do that. We have a court order. The agent nodded politely. You have a county-level order, and it is superseded by federal shoreline protections under Title 43. The HOA's patrol officers exchanged nervous looks. One quietly removed his sunglasses. Another stuffed his badge into his pocket. Marcus exhaled in audible relief. Bethany whirled toward him. Sheriff Hale, arrest them! Arrest him! Do something! Marcus looked at me instead. Not angry, not confused, just tired. Remy, he said softly, what exactly is going on? I stepped forward, letting the porch groan under my weight. The box labeled kitchen supplies sat behind me like a secret waiting for the right second. I rested my hand on it. Marcus, I said quietly, I need you to stay neutral. Everything's about to make sense. He studied my face, really looked at me, then nodded. All right, I'll trust you. Bethany exploded. Neutral? You're supposed to be enforcing the law. I am, he said. I'm just not sure it's your law. Thunder cracked in the distance as if the mountains themselves approved. Behind her, neighbors whispered, What does he have? Did the HOA screw up? Is this federal? Lord help her if it is. Bethany spun back toward me, pointing like her finger could fire bullets. Show me your documents, right now. Her voice echoed across the lake, bouncing off the water and dying out somewhere near the trees. I slowly lifted the leather binder off the railing. You want documents? I asked. Yes, she screamed. Show them! Show us all what gives you the right to be here! Lightning flashed somewhere far off, a white streak cutting through the darkening sky. I smiled. Not out of arrogance, but because the moment had finally arrived. I'll show you, I said softly. I opened the binder. Not to the deed. Not to the water rights. Not to the easement certification. Instead, I lifted a single laminated ID card, the one I'd been avoiding until now. The gold eagle glinted in the shifting light. The letters were unmistakable. NSA National Security Agency Special Agent, Financial and Infrastructure Division. Remy Cole gasps rippled across the gathering like shockwaves hitting still water. Bethany stumbled back half a step. No, this is fake. This is a trick. One of the agents behind her spoke. It's not fake. Marcus blinked. Remy? NSA? I nodded. Bethany's trembling voice cracked. Why would the NSA care about a lake house? I closed the binder gently. Because my uncle didn't just own a cabin, I said quietly. He owned the key piece of a protected federal shoreline zone, and the HOA has been illegally trying to seize it. Then I gestured toward the black SUVs behind her, and now they're here to shut it down. Silence followed. Deep. Heavy. The kind of silence that only comes after the wind itself decides it's done carrying lies. The storm wasn't coming. It had arrived. The three black SUVs finished their slow roll to a stop, gravel crunching under their heavy tires. Dust lifted in soft clouds and drifted through the sharp lake air, mixing with the scent of pine and distant rain. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the lake went still, as if Lone Elk itself knew this wasn't an ordinary Tuesday. Then the front driver's door opened. Special Agent Morrison stepped out, Federal Land Service's lead investigator, boots hitting the dirt with the calm certainty of someone who had walked into far worse messes than an overconfident Montana HOA. 2 U.S. Marshals followed behind her, towering figures with windbreakers flapping against the growing storm gusts. The HOA patrol officers straightened, eyes darting nervously. One quietly slipped off his sunglasses. Another tugged his vest lower, trying to hide the HOA logo stitched across his chest. Bethany Reed looked from them to the SUVs, then back at me, trying desperately to stitch together an explanation that didn't exist. This, this is a misunderstanding, she said, voice trembling. This is not a federal matter. This is a private HOA enforcement action. She stepped forward, but Agent Morrison raised a single hand, and Bethany froze mid-step like a deer spotting headlights. Ma'am, Morrison said calmly, please stand where you are. We'll address your role momentarily. My role? Bethany sputtered. Do you even know who I am? Yes, Morrison replied without hesitation. You're the HOA president who filed 34 shoreline modification complaints in the last year, and the woman who claimed jurisdiction over federally protected lake frontage. She nodded toward the boundary stakes. You planted those? Bethany swallowed hard. No. I authorized them. That's unfortunate, Morrison said. Behind her, more SUV doors opened. Another agent stepped out, flipping through a file thick enough to be a phone book. We got the easement reports, Morrison, he said. This whole zone is flagged. Federal restrictions, Cole family rights, HOA violation markers, multiple attempts to alter shoreline jurisdiction without state approval. Gasps from the neighbors rippled through the crowd like wind across tall grass. Bethany spun toward her people. Don't just stand there. Explain. Someone say something. This is fraud. But her volunteers looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. Agent Morrison approached Marcus next. Sheriff, thank you for maintaining control of the situation. We'll take it from here. Marcus let out a breath that looked like it carried 10 pounds of stress. Be my guest. Bethany lunged between them. You can't do this. Sheriff Hale works for our community. He must enforce the injunction. Morrison tilted her head. The injunction issued by Judge Halverston? Yes, Bethany barked. Exactly. The same Judge Halverston currently under federal review for unlawful coordination with homeowner associations? Morrison asked. Bethany's voice caught in her throat. That's irrelevant. No, Morrison said. It's not. Neighbors murmured louder now, some in shock, some in long-suppressed satisfaction. A few exchanged knowing glances. Others just crossed their arms, leaning back, waiting to watch the whole thing burn. I stepped off the porch, binder in hand. My boots hit the dirt road just as a distant growl of thunder echoed across the valley. Morrison turned toward me. Agent Cole, ready? Ready, I said. Bethany nearly dropped her tablet. Agent? You mean he? I told you earlier, I said calmly. I wasn't bluffing. She stumbled back a step, shaking her head. No. The NSA doesn't care about lake houses. They don't care about property lines. You're lying. I opened the binder and slid out a second envelope, sealed, embossed with a raised federal crest. This isn't about a lake house, I said quietly. This is about a shoreline zone tied to federal dam infrastructure. My uncle wasn't just a homeowner, Bethany. He was a federal marshal overseeing waterway protection. Morrison opened the envelope. Inside was the easement certification and the water rights validation, signed, stamped, and devastating. These documents show, Morrison announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, that the Cole property extends 30 feet into Lone Elk Lake. The HOA has no authority, none, over this shoreline. Every fine you issued is void. Every boundary marker is illegal, and your attempts to seize or influence this property are federally actionable. Bethany staggered like the words themselves struck her. What charges? She croaked. Morrison listed them with surgical precision. Fraudulent land claims, unauthorized modification of protected zones, interference with federal easement property, attempted seizure of private land under false authority. One of the HOA patrol officers slowly lowered his zip ties and whispered, "Oh boy." Another muttered, "We're in trouble." The neighbors stood transfixed. A dog barked in the distance. The wind cut across the road, carrying the cool scent of rain and pine. Bethany's voice cracked. "You have no right! This is HOA territory." Morrison leaned forward. "Ma'am, this isn't your lake. It never was." Behind her, one of the marshals spoke into a radio. "Be advised, we're on scene. Begin stage 2. Sarah moved up beside me. "They're asking for Bethany," she murmured. Sure enough, the second marshal stepped toward the crowd and asked, "Where is HOA President Bethany Reed?" Every head turned toward her, every eye fixed on her, and every ounce of HOA authority she once wielded evaporated like mist over the lake. She tried to speak, but only a faint, broken whisper came out. I didn't know." Morrison closed the binder in her hands. "Maybe you should have." Lightning flashed behind the mountains, thunder cracked, and the storm finally broke. Rain began as a thin mist, so soft it barely touched the ground, before building into steady drops that pinged off metal, rattled the pine needles overhead, and darkened the dust beneath everyone's boots. Residents pulled their jackets tighter. HOA volunteers covered their clipboards. Even the so-called Lake Patrol backed a few feet away, suddenly less sure of the legitimacy of their uniforms. But the federal agents didn't move. They stood firm, rain dotting their windbreakers without shifting their posture. Agent Morrison stepped closer to Bethany, her voice cutting through the rolling thunder like a steel cable through fog. "Ma'am, you will remain here. You are under federal investigation for attempted land seizure." "Land seizure," Bethany croaked. No, that can't be right. I was protecting community assets." "By altering boundaries without permits?" Morrison asked. "By issuing fraudulent fines? By interfering with a federally protected easement?" Bethany opened her mouth, then closed it. Her jaw trembled. Rain streaked down her coral blazer, leaving dark lines that looked like the fabric itself was cracking under pressure. One of the marshals stepped up beside her. "Ma'am, turn around." Her eyes widened. "No, wait, this isn't necessary. I didn't mean—" Another HOA board member, Jake Mercer, the self-appointed development consultant with a perfectly manicured beard and an ego taller than the pines, jumped forward. "Hold on, you can't do this. Bethany had full authority from the HOA. We're a legally recognized organization." Morrison didn't even look at him. "And you are?" Jake puffed out his chest like a peacock drenched in rain. "Jake Mercer, Senior Board Advisor. I manage shoreline development proposals." "Ah," Morrison said, turning toward him with a cold smile. "The one who pushed for new boat slips on protected water?" Jake blinked. "That project was community approved." "No," Sarah said from behind me. "It was developer approved. By you. With no environmental survey, no state permit, and no federal clearance." One of the neighbors laughed. A sharp, startled bark. Jake whipped around. "You don't understand the legal framework here," he said, voice rising. "We acted within HOA." He didn't finish. The second marshal stepped up, gripping Jake's elbow with practiced firmness. "Sir, you're also under investigation." "For what?" he screeched. "For aiding and advising in unlawful boundary modification and tampering with navigable water designations." Jake's face turned the color of wet ash. "Tampering? This is a lake, a small lake." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "All lakes connected to federal dam systems fall under federal jurisdiction. Lone Elk's outflow connects to Crow Basin, which connects to the Clearwater Dam, which means this," she swept her hand toward the water, "is protected land." The HOA crowd collectively winced. Jake tried to bolt, but the marshal tightened his grip. "Don't." Bethany reached toward her board members, shaking her head with trembling hands. "This is a misunderstanding. We believed." "You believed your authority outranked federal law," Morrison said. "That's the misunderstanding." The marshals placed handcuffs on Bethany first. They glinted silver in the rain. clicking shut with a finality that seemed to echo across the lake. Neighbors gasped. Some stepped forward. Others stepped back. The man holding his golden retriever whispered, "Well, guess she finally got what was coming." Behind them, several HOA volunteers quietly removed their volunteer badges or tucked them into pockets. One woman even whispered a soft apology before slipping away into the crowd. Then, almost like she felt the irony of the moment, Bethany pointed a drenched, shaking finger at me. "This is your fault! You manipulated this! You tricked us!" I shook my head. "I moved into my uncle's cabin. Everything else, you did." Jake was next, the cuffs snapping against his wrists. He barked protests, promises to sue, threats about connections. But the only people listening were those satisfied to see the HOA's arrogance finally hit the dirt. 2 more board members followed, faces pale, shocked, and furious at the sudden unraveling of their power. When the marshals finished, Agent Morrison turned back to me. Rain dripped off the brim of her cap, landing softly on the easement packet she still held. "You ready?" she asked. "For what?" I replied. She handed the pack back to me. "For what comes next. This entire HOA is getting reviewed. Their authority is suspended effective immediately." Gasps again. A woman whispered to her husband, "Suspended? Does that mean—" Sarah stepped forward, finishing the thought for her. "It means they no longer have any power to enforce anything. Not fines, not rules, not removals, nothing." A silence settled, thick, heavy, cleansing. Marcus finally walked over, shaking his head slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. Guess this is one for the books." I nodded, letting the moment settle before I lifted the binder again. Rain dotted the leather like a constellation. "I'm not done," I said. Bethany, still in cuffs, looked terrified. What else?" I opened the binder to a different section, a thicker stack of papers. These weren't the deeds, not the water rights. These were field reports, financial irregularities, unauthorized fund movements, the kind of documents that made accountants sweat. "This," I said, "is the part you didn't expect." Morrison nodded, understanding instantly. "Agent Cole," she said, "go ahead." I looked directly at Bethany. "I'm NSA Financial Division, and your HOA funds triggered a federal audit." Lightning flashed behind me. Thunder followed, and the truth landed harder than any storm. Bethany crumbled. "No, please. No." Jake's knees almost buckled. And the neighbors? Some covered their mouths. Some looked stunned. But many looked relieved. Because the lake didn't belong to the HOA, and now everyone knew it. The rain softened into a steady patter, tapping on porch railings, dripping from the evergreen branches, and darkening the dirt underfoot. The whole valley felt quieter, like the storm itself was waiting for what would happen next. Even the wind seemed to pause, hovering just above the lake's glassy surface. Agent Morrison stepped back to give me room, and the marshals, now standing with 3 cuffed HOA board members, watched in silence. The crowd tightened into a loose horseshoe shape around the porch, their faces equal parts curiosity, shock, and vindication. If there was ever a moment to end this cleanly, professionally, and undeniably, it was now. I set the binder on the porch railing, letting the leather settle under the weight of what was inside. Rain droplets scattered across the surface, rolling like beads of mercury. The wood beneath me creaked slightly as I opened the binder to the thick center section. "This," I announced, pulling out an aged but impeccably preserved document, "is the original federal deed issued to the Cole family in 1974. A hush swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's older than the subdivision." I unfolded the document carefully. The seal, gold, embossed, unmistakably authentic, caught a flash of lightning in the distance, shimmering like a warning. The deed, I continued, contains 3 critical clauses. I held up one finger. First, it grants full ownership of the North Shoreline to my uncle, Walter Cole. Permanent, non-transferable without family succession. Meaning I inherited it. Meaning I own it. Bethany whimpered. The rain on her coral blazer clung like a second skin. I raised a second finger. Second, it includes exclusive water access rights tied to the federal dam system. That gives the Cole family priority status over any lake management authority, including state and local organizations. Jake's jaw fell open. Priority over the HOA? Sarah didn't bother hiding her smile. Over everyone. I lifted a third finger. And third, this is the part the HOA really didn't want to know. I tapped the lower half of the page where a small map was printed. The deed identifies protected zones extending 30 feet into the lake, making the entire HOA dock, clubhouse deck, and boat ramp easement violations. Gasps erupted. Several residents turned to look toward the water where the HOA dock jutted proudly into the lake, now revealed to be sitting right on top of federal land. One man muttered, "You gotta be kidding me." Another whispered, "They charged me $600 just to tie up my canoe there." Agent Morrison took the deed from me and held it up for the marshals to examine. Rain spattered the paper, but the laminate protector held firm. Morrison turned to the crowd. For clarity, the HOA has been operating facilities on protected federal shoreline without permits. Their authority is suspended effective immediately, pending further review. All fines issued under these false boundaries are null and void. The reaction was instant. What? They fined me $500 for a kayak shed. They towed my pontoon last year for blocked access, which wasn't even theirs. Oh, they're done. They're so done. Residents murmured their fury, but underlying that anger was something else. Relief. A release of pressure that had been building for years. Bethany shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. You can't just... She turned to Marcus, grasping for familiar authority. Sheriff, tell them. The HOA has rights. We're recognized by the county. Marcus removed his hat and wiped rain from his forehead. Bethany, you crossed federal lines. This is out of my hands. Jake, still cuffed, tried one last defiant stand. You can't prove intent. You can't prove we knowingly violated boundaries. Sarah stepped forward and handed Agent Morrison a second folder, one I hadn't even peeked inside yet. What's that? Bethany whispered. Morrison opened it. Her eyebrow rose with quiet satisfaction. These, she said, are drone photos of your contractor, hired by Mr. Mercer, moving boundary markers into private property, time-stamped, geotagged, documented. Jake recoiled like he'd been slapped. You hacked us. I didn't hack anything, Sarah replied coolly. Your contractor live-streamed the whole thing on his business page. Apparently, he's very proud of his craftsmanship. A few neighbors snorted laughter despite the tension. Agent Morrison gave a small nod to the marshals. Proceed with charges. As the marshals read the official statements, fraud, unlawful modification, tampering with federal boundaries, attempted seizure of protected land, the storm broke again. Hard rain hammered the ground like a drumline, echoing off cabin walls and gravel. I stood quietly, watching Bethany's posture collapse as reality consumed her. The power she'd wielded over this community, at HOA meetings, on front porches, through fines and threats, evaporated like mist. She looked at me with eyes full of fear, anger, and disbelief. Why are you doing this to me? I shook my head gently. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just protecting what my family has stewarded for half a century. You're the one who went after us. Her knees buckled for a moment before the marshal steadied her. Agent Morrison stepped toward me again, handing back the deed. Agent Cole, with the HOA suspended, the lake's jurisdiction defaults to the federal easement holder. She paused. That's you. A murmur spread. All shoreline regulations will run through you, Morrison said. Any resident claims, project proposals, or access disputes will be reviewed by you and your appointed representative. Sarah elbowed me lightly. You ever wanted to be a lake boss? I chuckled softly. Not really, but I'll take being a good neighbor. Agent Morrison nodded approvingly. We'll finalize the paperwork. Anything else you'd like to address before we clear out? I glanced at Marcus, the sheriff who had stood caught between two worlds all afternoon. Yeah, I said. Just one thing. Marcus stepped closer. What's that? I looked toward the lake, toward the dock, toward the rain hitting the water in perfect ripples. What do you think I should do with the lake now? Marcus smiled, a slow, knowing smile that carried 20 years of Montana common sense. Do what your uncle did, he said. Take care of it. The storm began to ease. The sky cracked open into soft streaks of gold behind the clouds, and for the first time since morning, the lake looked like it could breathe again. The storm eased into a gentle drizzle, the kind that settles dust instead of stirring it. The air smelled different, lighter, almost sweet, like the whole valley had exhaled after holding its breath far too long. Pine needles glistened. The gravel softened. The lake calmed to a slow shimmer as if waking from a long nightmare. The last federal vehicles rolled down the dirt road, tires crunching against wet stones. Their taillights disappeared between the tree line and the fog lifting from the water. The crowd of neighbors, now much smaller, lingered in clusters, laughing quietly, hugging, talking like people who had suddenly remembered they were allowed to speak without fear of fines or threats. For years, this place had lived under a pink-suited shadow. Tonight, it finally stepped back into the sun. Sarah leaned her shoulder into mine. You okay? Yeah, I said softly, eyes fixed on the lake. Just letting it all settle. She nodded. She understood better than most. Her work dealt with unraveling knots of land rights and water laws that took decades to tie. But this had been a knot someone tied on purpose. Marcus walked up, hat tucked under his arm, rain still dripping from the brim. His uniform was soaked and wrinkled, but he wore the first genuine smile I'd seen on him all day. Well, he said, that was one hell of a Tuesday. I laughed. Not what you expected when you woke up this morning. Thought I'd write a parking citation and get a sandwich. He sucked his teeth and shook his head. Didn't think I'd witness the collapse of the most notorious HOA in the county. A few residents nearby clapped at that. Even in the fading light, I could see the relief in their eyes. Little signs of hope, unclenching jaws, loosened shoulders, the way they breathed deeper. The valley hadn't felt this human in a long time. Sarah helped me gather the illegal signs. We walked the shoreline with a wheelbarrow, collecting every HOA property, authorized access only, and no docking sign the board had planted like landmines. Each stake came out of the damp ground with a soft thunk, leaving behind a small patch of earth ready to grow something honest again. One resident, a quiet man named Roger, who'd been fined almost $4,000 for an unauthorized fishing shed, joined us. He wordlessly dug up a boundary post and tossed it into the wheelbarrow with a satisfied grunt. I nodded at him. Thank you. He wiped his brow. Well, no, thank you. His voice was hoarse with emotion. Been waiting 13 years for someone to stand up to them. Another woman approached, holding her little daughter's hand. Can she play? She asked, as though unsure if it was truly allowed. She nodded toward the shoreline. Sarah smiled. It's your lake. Always has been. The little girl giggled and ran straight toward the water, splashing at the edge where the sand met the lake. Her laugh echoed across the quiet cove, bouncing between the hills like a sound the valley hadn't heard in far too long. I swallowed hard. That single laugh held more power than any badge I'd ever carried. As evening settled in, the sky warmed into a sunset that lit the entire lake in copper and gold. The storm clouds drifted apart like curtains pulling back for the final scene. Folks brought out grills, folding chairs, coolers. It wasn't planned, just natural, organic. A gathering of people who suddenly remembered what community felt like. Kids skipped rocks. Teens dragged kayaks down the bank. Neighbors asked each other how long they'd lived here and why they'd stayed. Sarah watched it all with the satisfied expression of someone who finally saw a wrong being righted. "This is what your uncle wanted," she said softly. "This exact moment." I nodded, throat tightening. He tried to protect this lake. They tried to erase him. "Well," she said, nudging my shoulder, "you erased them back." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Not erased, just removed from the driver's seat." Semantics. Marcus approached again, hands tucked in his belt. "Remy, you should say something," he said. "They're all looking at you like you're the new sheriff of the shoreline." I looked around. Dozens of eyes were on me. Curious, grateful, hopeful. I stepped onto the porch. The boards were damp beneath my boots. The breeze carried the smell of firewood and lake water. And for the first time all day, I let myself speak openly. "This lake never needed their rules," I said. My voice carried across the yard, steady against the gentle hush of water against the bank. Never needed their fines, their threats, their fear. People quieted. Even the kids paused mid-skip. All it ever needed, I continued, was the truth and people who care about it. A few nods rippled through the crowd. My uncle cared. Many of you did too. Today, we got it back. A soft cheer rose, pure, warm, unforced. I raised the deed slightly, not as a weapon, but a promise. "We're not rebuilding the HOA," I added. "We're rebuilding the community, together." Louder cheers this time. Relief, hope, the good kind. Later that night, after folks drifted home and the last grill smoke faded, I stood alone at the water's edge. The moon sat low over the hilltops, painting the lake in soft silver. The lake was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. Sarah joined me, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool breeze. "You did good today," she whispered. "We did good," I corrected. "All of us." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "So, lake boss?" I laughed gently. "Let's not call it that." "Well, whatever we call you, just make sure there's room for Saturday barbecues." "There's room," I said softly. "Plenty of it." The wind pushed a slow ripple across the lake, like a sigh of contentment. And as I stood there, boots in damp sand, breeze carrying pine and water, moonlight stretching across the calm surface, I finally felt the weight of the day lift from my chest. The lake was free. The people were free. And somewhere in the quiet of the mountains, I hoped my uncle knew. We finished what he started, and we made this place a home again. If you've ever stood your ground against unfairness, drop a justice in the comments so folks know they're not alone. And if stories about dignity, land, and doing what's right speak to you, hit subscribe so you're here for the next fight and the next win.